Hi, I'm Rashonda. I'm the creator of ArtByRow.com, where I help hobby artists grow by teaching them how to focus on the process rather than the outcome. I specialize in developing creativity, creating more art in less time, and using graffiti art to generate ideas instead of always wondering what you should be working on. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, subscribe so you get notified whenever new videos get uploaded. Now let's head on over to the art studio and do some drawings. We're going to work on today's tutorial together. Let's head on over. All right, welcome to the Art by Row studio, and it is time to draw some Christmas trees. These are really easy to do. There's a lot of different variation you can put into them. Different styles, different ways of decorating them. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here. So there's a lot of different things you can do with the Christmas trees, and I'll show you several examples at the end of the video to give you some different ideas of some styles, some different ways you can do them. I'm doing mine on an artist trading card. I love working on artist trading cards. Working small just really, it saves a lot of time, and that helps me feel more motivated to work on my little projects because I know I'm not going to be spending a ton of time on them. I know I can fit it into my schedule, so that's why I prefer to work small and work on the artist trading cards. So the first thing we always want to do, whenever possible, is to start by laying out the basic shapes. And of course, a Christmas tree is just a triangle. So one of the reasons for laying out these basic shapes is that it helps us get, for the biggest thing is really, it helps you get started. So instead of thinking about how am I going to draw the Christmas tree, you start by just doing a triangle. A triangle is very easy. Most of us are not going to feel intimidated by drawing a triangle, but many of us might feel intimidated by how to go about drawing a Christmas tree. So we start with the basic shape. That gets us putting some marks on our paper. Very low intimidation, so it's a great way to start. And it gives us an idea of where everything is going to be placed on our drawing paper, or whatever it is you're going to be drawing on, whether it's a sketchbook or if you're making custom holiday greeting cards. Whatever it is, you can get the size and the placement down good. So for our Christmas tree, we got a basic triangle shape. And then what we want to do is add in the actual details of the Christmas tree. There's so many different ways you can do this. And again, like I said, I'll show you some different examples of ones that I've come up with. And I'm sure there's many, many more. But what you want to do is follow this basic triangle shape and then add in your different branches and some little textures of the branches and the tree. And just do that by following that triangle shape, and then do the same thing on the other side. Now, when you do this, you can keep it symmetrical or not. It doesn't really matter, because really Christmas trees are not symmetrical. The branches where they stick out are not going to line up on an actual Christmas tree. There's going to be a lot of variation to them. So, but that's up to you. Just do whatever you think looks and feels right for you. If making it symmetrical feels better, then do what you can to make it symmetrical. I wouldn't be overly particular about it or stressed out about it. But if that's important to you and that feels right to you, then make it symmetrical. And if not, then just make your little branches. Do the same thing across the bottom. We got our little trunk coming off the bottom, and then a little indication of some kind of ground so our Christmas tree's not floating. The next thing I like to do is the star, or whatever it is you want to put on the top of your tree. And again, there are so many different ways and different styles you can make your star in. Or if you want, you could draw like maybe an angel or a snowflake or whatever it is you want on top of your Christmas tree. If you want anything at all, you don't necessarily have to put something on there. Now, for the shape of your tree, for the branches, if you wanted to, you could do some across the front. You could do maybe just a couple little indications of some branches, some texture up here. That's up to you. All of these things that I'm talking about are personal decisions based off of your artistic style and what you think looks good and what doesn't look good. And we're using pencils, so if you put some little textures in here and decide you don't like it, then you can always erase it. I'm going to go over this with a pen in a little bit. So anything I don't want can just be erased when I get to that stage. So now we want to put all the little decorations in here. And once again, so many different ways that you can do it. So I like starting with some garland. And you can do the fuzzy garland. You can do, if you want to make it look like the little popcorn strings that used to be really popular on Christmas trees back when I was a kid. I mean, there's just a ton of different decorations you can put on there. Everybody decorates their Christmas tree different. In real life, they're decorated very differently. You know, I think different families have different traditions of how they decorate their trees, and then that kind of gets carried off from generation to generation. So do whatever you like, or if you want to experiment with some different things. I typically don't try putting Christmas lights on my trees when I draw them, because to me, it's too tedious to try to do it. If you wanted to, you could use a marker and just make some dots to look like lights. I typically just leave the lights off, because for me it feels too cluttered and it just feels too tedious to try to do that. But again, that's just one of those things that is a personal preference. So you absolutely should do whatever you think looks and feels right. If to you it seems ridiculous to not put lights on your Christmas tree drawing, then you should put lights on your Christmas tree drawing. Just do whatever feels good to you. So I'm drawing in the ornaments, the bulbs. And I'm just kind of randomly adding some circles in there for where I want the bulbs to be. And that's pretty much it for what I want to add onto my Christmas tree. You could do more or less. You could do them different. You could put different shapes for your ornaments. Maybe there's something that's very near and dear to you when you decorate your own Christmas tree and you want to draw that in there. That is up to you. But that is it for the sketch. I'm going to grab my outlining pen and I will be right back. Right, so for my outlines, I prefer using the Sharpie pens. This is a medium point. I don't typically like using the Sharpie products, but I do like these particular pens. This is really the only Sharpie that I use. They have the other pens. See if I can find one right. Yeah. So these I do not like using. They tend to bleed out more on the paper, and to me they have a very strong odor, and I don't like that. I'm sensitive to smells, so I don't like using those. These are very different than the other ones, and they don't bleed into the paper. They leave a nice sharp crisp line. And there's a lot of other outlining pens you can use. You can use brush pens. You can use whatever you want. It's all, it's just whatever feels right to you and whatever you prefer. So whatever that preference is, then that's what you should be doing. If you don't know, experiment, try some different things, see what other people use. So for outlining this Christmas tree, you want to start with the garland or anything that goes around the tree, because this is going to be on top of your branches. And you don't want to accidentally do your branches and draw through your garland or whatever other decorations you might have wrapped around your tree. The bulbs don't really matter at this point. They can be done after you outline the tree. But anything that goes over top of the tree branches, I would outline first, just to kind of avoid making any type of mistakes on it. So I'm going to do that. And then, so you want to just pay attention to the lines that you want to keep. You don't want to go over top of your initial sketch of the triangle shape. You're just going to go right over top of all these lines for your branches. And for this, you can start wherever you want. I kind of started in a weird spot, but it doesn't really matter. And you can clean it up a little bit if there's something you didn't quite like how you sketched out a branch, then just clean it up a little bit. Fix it as you go, or you can go back in with your pencil if you need to and fix something up if it doesn't look quite right before you do your outlining. So I'm just going right over top the pencil lines that I want to keep. And then if you want, you can go back in where there would be shadows, like on the undersides of your decorations would be darker. There would be a shadow under there. So if you wanted to, you could go back in and do another pass over that and thicken that up a little bit to help add a little bit of variation. Same thing maybe like with the bottom part of the branches. You could thicken that line up a little bit. And that'll show a little bit of an indication of where it would be darker, where there would be a shadow cast on it. That's up to you. That's really just a personal preference of how you want your outline to look. And then, of course, just go in, go over top of your ornaments. So I also leave the candy canes off because, again, I think it kind of clutters it up. But if that's something that doesn't seem right to you, if you think the candy canes need to be on there, then add them on. I would suggest probably doing them just an indication of them and not trying to be super detailed unless you enjoy doing that sort of thing. But you could just put a shape of a candy cane, and you could also go back over it at the end with a paint marker would go over. I'm going to use marker on this, but you could go back over it with a paint marker and add some lights or candy canes or something like that. That would probably be an easier way maybe to do it. In my mind, it would be easier. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but for me, I think doing the simpler decorations and then maybe going back with a little paint marker might work, because that would go right over top of everything else. So you could just go right over it and draw, maybe take a white marker and draw the shape of your candy cane and then let that dry and maybe put like some red lines across it to make it look like the stripes of a candy cane. And you could also use the paint marker to just add some dots along the way for the lights. You could even add the wiring to the lights that way if you wanted to. I'm sure that would work really well. So the next thing we need to do is to grab some markers and start working on the color. So I'm going to cut off here for a second, grab my markers, and then I will be right back and we'll go through how to color it. So I'm going to be using markers today for my drawing. So I want to talk a little bit about markers and how I use them, and also just markers in general. So the way that I use my markers is that I like to blend them together so that there's a little bit of a smooth transition with them. That's just the look that I like. That's how I work when I color in my drawings. That doesn't mean that it's the right way or the only way. It's just one way. It's the way that I do it. So when choosing markers, if you want to be able to blend them together, you need to make sure you're using alcohol-based markers. Excuse me. So Bic markers, Sharpie, there's a ton of different markers out there. Copic. The other thing I want to mention is that you can mix and match different markers. So I have these touch markers that I bought quite a while ago, and they're still working really well. They haven't ran out yet. I like these. I like the tip. So a lot of markers are dual tip, which means there's two different choices for which tip you want to use. So these have like this bullet fine tip, and then there's like a chisel tip on the other side. Sharpie markers, most of you are probably familiar with them. They only have just the one. That's all you get. Same thing with the Bic markers. They're similar to the Sharpies. I personally like the Bic over the Sharpies because, like I said earlier, I think the Sharpies have too strong of an odor, and I don't like the way they smell. They start giving me a headache. So I don't like using Sharpies. I do have some. It's not bad enough that I'm just going to throw them out. But if, for example, when this marker runs out, I won't replace it with another Sharpie. I'll try to find a marker that's similar to this one in color. So these two markers I know go really well together. So when I'm using green, these are my two go-to markers. So when the Sharpie runs out, I'll just try to find another marker that works really well with this one, or I can pick two different markers altogether. So you can mix and match them. And again, this is for if you want to be able to blend the colors together. So I'm going to start. And I always want to pick 2 or 3 markers. And what I do is I test them ahead of time on a little scrap piece of cardstock. And these little scrap pieces are left over from the full sheets after I cut my artist trading cards out. I just save these little extra pieces instead of throwing them out. And then I test my marker colors on them, so I know what markers I want to use. So just as an example, you can see, I think this picks it up okay. These pinks, I wouldn't use these two pinks together because I don't like how harsh of an edge there is there. So I don't want to use those two pinks together. You might be going for that type of effect, or maybe you don't care about that transition being smooth, but I want my markers to blend together a little bit better than that. Sometimes it's okay and sometimes it's not. It just depends on, I guess, the mood I'm in and also what it is that I'm working on. So what I like to do is put my lightest color down first and then add some darker areas with the darker color and then go back over it with the lighter color and blend them together. So those are pretty close together, and that's a small area, so I don't know how well you can see that. I think the camera affects it a little bit. It doesn't pick it up that great. So I used to recommend the Bic markers quite a bit. When I first started making the tutorials and the videos and whatnot, I was using the Bic markers quite a bit. The one thing that I liked about them is that they have them at, like, our local grocery store is a Kroger, and you can buy packs of Bic markers at Kroger. So if I run out and I need markers, I got a 5-minute drive, I can go up to Kroger and I can grab me a pack of markers. And at the time, I want to say they were like $10 or something for a big pack of Bic markers. I've kind of gotten away from that recommendation for a couple of reasons. One is that I don't like that there's only this one tip size on them. I like having the dual tip markers are a lot nicer. The other thing that I don't like about them is that there are certain colors that I use more than others. Like, there's a blue color that I love the way it looks. I like the color of it, the shade of it. And I use it all the time because I like it. So it always runs out. And then if I want to get a replacement for that blue, for that particular shade of blue, then I have to buy an entire set that includes that blue marker. I can't just buy that blue marker. Bic doesn't offer open stock selections for markers, at least not that I've been able to find. I've looked online. And you can't replace just a single marker. So what you end up with is it ends up in the long run not really being cost effective, because if you want to replace a color that you really like using, then you have to spend another $10-15 or whatever they are for an entire set just for that one marker. And then you end up with a bunch of colors you don't use all the time. You end up with extras of those, and then you keep running out of the other ones. So I've kind of gotten away from that. I haven't really landed on anything in particular as far as a replacement for them, because I really have a lot of markers right now, and they last a long time, so I don't have to replace them very often. So I haven't really looked too much into replacements for those. But I think anything works. I mean, I tried the Copics. I know a lot of people really like the Copic markers. For me, in what I do, because I'm more of a hobby artist, which just means that I create art just for my own relaxation purposes and for my own enjoyment. So I don't need to spend a ton of money on my supplies. I do want to mention though, so these markers here, they came in a set that somebody gave to me as a gift. They had been out at a craft store or wherever they were at, and they seen them, and they knew I liked using markers in my artwork, so they picked me up a pack. That's not something I would buy. Like I said, I don't need to go as high end as like a Copic, or like, I don't care if it's like the Prismacolor or whatever. But you do need to be careful with buying supplies that are too cheap. And not because they're not good quality necessarily, not for what I'm using them for anyway, but because what I found out with these markers is that when I work on some of my more detailed pieces, I sometimes have to go back and forth with blending the markers. And these markers tend to oversaturate the paper, and then they bleed really bad. And you'll have like these fuzzy lines around the edges, which I only discovered because I just happened to be using those markers for that drawing. And they're fine if you don't if you don't go back and forth too many times with them, they work just fine. Like for doing these bulbs, it's okay because I'm not going back and forth with the markers that much. But the difference between like these touch markers and these kind of off-brand markers is that with the touch markers or the Bics or any of my other markers, I can go back and forth and keep working the same area and I don't have any issues with it. But with these off-brand markers, going back and forth with them ends up causing a problem because the paper gets oversaturated and it bleeds through. Like you can even see where I put the bulbs at, where I use these off-brand markers. You can see where they bleed through the paper and the other ones don't. The Star did a little bit, but you know, the browns really didn't too much. Those bleed through a lot more. For whatever reason, they just saturate the paper more than the other brands of markers. So again, there's nothing wrong with using them. If your style and your method that you use for your colors and how you work and how you apply your colors, if you can work with it and it doesn't affect anything, then there's no reason to not use cheaper off-brand markers if that's what you have available to you. And I'm going to cover up this yellow with green, but I want to get a little bit of like a lime green color in here and see what that looks like. So I'm going in with my yellow first. And again, this is just how I like to work. You can do the reverse and do your dark colors and then put your light colors in the remaining areas. I don't like working that way. So your markers, you can cover up lighter colors with darker colors. They're a little bit transparent, but not totally. So you can go in and cover this up. So this marker, excuse me, this marker that I'm using right now will look different on its own than if it's layered over top of the yellow. But I couldn't put yellow over top of the green. It wouldn't show. But you can put the darker color over the lighter color. So the other way, so what I mean by you could work in the opposite way, you could use this marker and leave some open areas and then add the yellow to those open areas. But I like that, to me, that way's a little bit too limiting because you only have one shot at getting it the way you want it to look. Where if you do the lighter color and then go over with the darker color, you can make different decisions as you go and go back in and darken it up or fill in some areas and change it. And then the other thing I want to mention is that these colors are somewhat transparent, but know that you have the option to go back over the same color and darken it up with layers. And also know that if you do go back over it additional times, it's going to get darker each time that you go back over it again. So if you like the way your colors are looking, then be careful about going back over it and reworking it, because it will it'll change the way it looks. It'll make it darker. And I'm working in sections while my marker's still wet. If you let the marker dry and then go back over it, it's not going to blend as much. It might blend a little bit as that alcohol gets back into the pigment again, but it's not going to blend in the same way as it does when you're working while the markers are still wet. So this is going to be my darkest color for the green. And you can add this wherever you want to darken it up. The way you work in your artistic style will determine how you use your colors. And if you want your drawings to look real flat, you can just use one solid color. Like I mentioned earlier, this is just one way of doing it. This is how I do mine. 3 years from now, if I'm still doing this type of artwork, chances are this will not be the same way that I'll be working, because your style will evolve as you work and as you learn and as you try different things and get exposed to other artists and their work and get inspired by different things. Your style will evolve as you experiment and try different things, which is another thing that I really love about the artist trading cards, is because they don't take a lot of time. It's really easy to experiment with what you're doing, and trying different things isn't as scary to do, because it's not like you feel like, oh man, I just put hours into this drawing. I don't want to mess it up by trying something new. So that's pretty much it for the colors. I could do some kind of a background. Sometimes I just put like this, I call it a halo around the outside edge. I'll take a color and just kind of outline it on the edge. I like the way that looks. I could do a sky in the background. There's a lot of different options with what you could do. And again, the best thing to do is just to experiment, play around, try new things. The last thing that I usually do with my drawings, and this actually works better if you let these markers dry, let that alcohol evaporate a little bit. But I like to take a white Jelly Roll pen and just add just some little touches of white in here for some highlights, and mostly just to break up the big chunks of color is what I use it for. I don't pay real close attention to a light source. I more or less just use it, like I said, just to break those chunks of color up. I do pay a little bit of attention to a light source in that for these bulbs, I added the darker color to the bottom. So I added the white opposite of where I did the dark. But other than those sorts of things, I don't worry too much about where my light source would be coming from. I'm not trying to be realistic with what I'm drawing, so for me that's not all that important. But I do like to break up the chunks of color a little bit. I think the white adds to it. So that's pretty much it for the color. If you want to do a background, like I said earlier, there's a lot of different options for the background. But for the most part, we can consider this finished. And it's ready to either go into my portfolio, or I can trade it to another artist for some of their work. So I mentioned earlier that I would show you some different drawings that I've done with the Christmas trees, and to give you some ideas for some different styles. So this one, kind of a little bit more abstract, a simple design. Again, these are all on artist trading cards to save time and to make it a lot easier to experiment. This one was more of a cartoon. I did like a chunky design, a chunky trunk. Did some circles for the decorations. This one was just kind of a weird shape of the Christmas tree, just playing around with the shape a little bit. Another one that's a little more abstract, I did this with some text from a book. I just cut it down to the size of an artist trading card and then glued it to some cardstock and then drew the Christmas tree over the top of that. This one, that's kind of like a Grinch type of a look to it. Just something a little more fun, a little crazy looking. And then again, just something playing around, seeing what it looks like. Doing some different things like drawing these lines, extending past where the rest of it is, and just messing around a little bit and seeing what it looks like. Trying some different things, making it look original and unique and a little bit stylized. So a lot of different things you can do. Again, start with the basic shapes and then go from there. It gives you a good starting point. So you can take, the way I did these was I had my original, you know, just a standard looking Christmas tree. And then what I did was started with the triangle, and then as I drew it out, I tried to decide or think of some different ideas that I could do with the shape. So this one, a triangle, but I made it real skinny. I curved it. This one's still a triangle, and then I bent it around at the top and then did some more texture here with this. But just playing around with that triangle shape and seeing how far can you push it. And then from there, you just add your decorations, try to come up with some different ideas. This one, the decorations are just a zigzag black line, but you can look at it, you know, it's a Christmas tree. So playing around on the artist trading cards is really easy because they don't take that long. And you can cut 10 artist trading cards out of one sheet of cardstock. So they're inexpensive, they're easy to make, and then it makes it quick, fun, and easy to experiment. And that is all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I sure hope that you guys try to do some of your own crazy Christmas trees. That's it. I will see you in the next video. Happy creating! So how did you do? Hopefully you followed along with the tutorial and worked on your own artwork. If you enjoyed this and you want to get notified of other lessons that are coming up in the future, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and you'll get notified whenever something new gets uploaded. Have a good day and happy creating!